In this fifth module of our lecture on Russell's article, The Value of Philosophy, we want to turn our attention to that second overarching question, the one after which the article is named, namely, what is the value of philosophy? As before, in thinking about how Russell might answer that question, we want to consider the things that Russell says. I'll point to three individual quotations, and we can think about the article overall and try and formulate what we think Russell's answer to this question might be. How does Russell answer the question, what is the value of philosophy? So our first quotation comes from page 156 and over into 157. Here Russell says, the value of philosophy is, in fact, to be sought largely in its very uncertainty. The person who has no tincture of philosophy goes through life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense, from the habitual beliefs of their age or their nation, and from the convictions which have grown up in their mind without the cooperation or consent of their deliberate reason. Let's look at a second quotation, this one much shorter, from page 158. All acquisition of knowledge is an enlargement of the self, but this enlargement is best attained when it is not directly sought. And finally, on page 161, we find Russell summarizing his article as follows. Philosophy is to be studied, not for the sake of any definite answers to its questions, since no definite answers can as a rule be known to be true, but rather for the sake of the questions themselves, because these questions enlarge our conception of what is possible, enrich our intellectual imagination, and diminish the dogmatic assurance which closes the mind against speculation. But above all, because through the greatness of the universe which philosophy contemplates, the mind is also rendered great, and becomes capable of that union with the universe which constitutes its highest good. So again, you might want to stop the video or run it back, think about these quotations, about the article overall, and see if you can formulate how Russell might answer this question, what is the value of philosophy? So I think Russell's answer here has a couple of different aspects to it. First off, I think Russell would definitely say that philosophy helps us to step outside of prejudice, of habit, of unexamined conviction. It allows us to transcend the blinders of our particular time and place, at least to some degree. And it does this through a critical examination of our convictions by looking at our reasons or lack of reasons for the particular beliefs, prejudices, habits, presuppositions that we have about ourselves, our society, the universe. We can distance ourselves at least a little bit from unexamined conviction, from prejudice, from habit, from the context of our lives. And in doing so, Russell thinks we diminish dogmatic assurance. Those are his words. I like those words. We give a certain amount of critical and skeptical room to our ideas so that we recognize that it's possible for people to think in different ways, to hold different beliefs. It's possible that we're wrong about things. We step back and recognize the limitations of our own convictions, the limitations of our own time, and so on. Russell also thinks that philosophy has value because it enlarges our conception of what is possible. It encourages us to think beyond what's there in front of us, what's in our context, what we currently believe, and to consider other possibilities, other contexts, other potential ways that we could believe, that the world could be, society could be, and so on. In doing that, I think he thinks it also enriches our intellectual imagination. It fuels our intellectual creativity. It allows us to think in a much more flexible and creative fashion. And he thinks that that, in and of itself, is a value that can be had from philosophy. Finally, there's this talk about enlarging the self or rendering the mind great. And you might wonder, well, what does that really mean? It sounds kind of metaphorical or pretentious. What is Russell trying to get at here? And I'll suggest an interpretation of this. It may not be the only interpretation, but I think this is a reasonable interpretation of what Russell's trying to get at. So when Russell talks about enlarging the self or rendering the mind great by the contemplation of the universe, I think what he's really talking about is philosophy allows us to create a more accurate, systematic, and unified worldview. It allows us to understand the nature of ourselves, of society, of the universe in a way that isn't dictated by how we'd like to view ourselves or society or the universe. It tries to look at the world in a cold, hard, realistic light and to create an understanding of ourselves, of society, of the universe that is accurate, that is systematic, that is unified in a way that we might not create were we not engaged in this project of philosophy, of examining our convictions, of considering possibilities, of enriching our intellectual imagination. And I think these things are definitely part of what Russell thinks the value of philosophy consists in. In our last module, we'll want to go back and pick up that question that we didn't answer about Russell's conception of philosophy. Specifically, we want to go back and look at what is philosophical methodology? What methodology does philosophy employ? And then we'll finish with a few general questions that I won't try to answer, but I'll encourage you to think about.